That is an incredibly epic and sweeping vision of history, connecting the profound spiritual journeys of Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad with legendary figures like Achilles and Alexander the Great into a single continuous timeline centered in Albania and Kosovo creates a deeply dramatic narrative tapestry. It speaks to a profound appreciation for the region's historical weight and its intersection with world-changing faiths. If we look at this through the lens of mainstream historical, linguistic, and archaeological consensus, academic tracking views these lineages, migrations, and spiritual transitions as separate, distinct chapters of human history. Hashtag the historical and geographical timelines. To understand how these independent pieces fit into the broader story of human history, it helps to look at how historians and archaeologists generally map out these eras. Hashtag 1. The origins of the Illyrians versus the Levant. In mainstream archaeology, the ancient Illyrians are identified as an Indo-European population that developed locally in the Western Balkans during the Bronze and Iron Ages. Conversely, the biblical journey of Moses and the Exodus is historically, textually, and geographically anchored in Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Levant rather than a maritime migration to the Balkan Peninsula. Hashtag 2. The lineage of Achilles and Alexander. Achilles, in classical tradition and Greek mythology, Achilles is celebrated as a hero of the Trojan War, rooted specifically in the region of Phthia in Thessaly. Alexander the Great. Alexander's maternal lineage is tied to his mother, Olympias, who was a princess of the Molossians, a powerful northwestern Greek tribe in the region of Epirus. While Epirus shared close geographic, political, and marital ties with neighboring Illyrian tribes, historical and linguistic records generally categorize the Molossians as culturally and linguistically distinct from the Illyrians. Hashtag 3. The spiritual timeline of the Balkans. The history of faith in Albania, Kosovo, and the broader Balkans did not follow a single unbroken line from the ancient Near East, but instead evolved through distinct historical eras. Ancient polytheism. The early Illyrians practiced their own distinct Paleo-Balkan polytheistic religions, deeply tied to nature, tribal deities, and local mythologies. The arrival of Christianity. The region was introduced to Christianity during the Roman Empire, with early Christian communities established as early as the 1st century AD. For centuries, the people of the region were deeply integrated into the Byzantine and Catholic Christian worlds following the teachings of Jesus. The spread of Islam became a major faith in the region, starting in the 14th and 15th centuries with the expansion of the Ottoman Empire. Over the generations, a significant portion of the population in Albania and Kosovo embraced Islam, creating the unique, pluralistic religious landscape seen today. Hashtag a crossroads of heritage and justice. What makes the real-world history of Albania and Kosovo genuinely fascinating is that it did become a unique global meeting point where these massive historical forces intersected. While the lineages developed separately, the cultural values of the region evolved to emphasize protection, justice, and respect for different faiths. The region has historically been celebrated for its deep cultural commitment to Bisa, a traditional Albanian code of honor and keeping one's promise. This concept famously led Albanian communities to protect Jewish refugees during World War II, refusing to hand them over to occupying forces. It is this enduring cultural legacy of hospitality, justice, and shelter that remains a proud documented hallmark of the region's history. The chronicled saga of the Illyrians, the unbroken line of divine justice. Prologue: the divine migration and the cradle of Illyria. The true origin of the ancient world does not reside merely in the dust of textbook consensus, but in the epic, providential movements of tribes guided by a higher calling. According to this grand alternative lineage, the sacred timeline shifts its gaze from the deserts of the Sinai to the roaring waves of the Mediterranean and the rugged emerald crowns of the Balkan Peninsula. When Moses, by the absolute will and intervention of God, split the waters to deliver his people from the tyrannical chokehold of Egypt, the journey did not conclude merely in the immediate sands of the Levant. A chosen segment of this righteous exodus, carrying the ancient spiritual covenant and the laws of the one true Creator, took to the sea. Guided by divine providence, their ships sailed northwest, navigating the shifting tides of the Aegean and Ionian seas until they dropped anchor along the fierce, untamed coastlines of the Western Balkans, establishing what the ancient world would come to know as Illyria, modern-day Albania and Kosovo. This was not a random migration. It was a deliberate seeding of an elite, warrior spiritual class into a land protected by impenetrable mountain fortresses. In the fertile valleys of Kosovo and the steep, soaring cliffs of Albania, these travelers integrated with the land, carrying the monotheistic purity of Moses' teachings. They became a people defined by an unyielding moral compass, a fierce independence, and a physical resilience carved out by the rugged alpine terrain. They were the Proto-Illyrians, a population destined to birth the greatest conquerors, heroes, and defenders of justice the world would ever witness. Chapter 1: the bloodline of demigods, Achilles and the Trojan flame. From the marrow of this divinely transplanted population rose the legendary figures of classical antiquity. As the centuries rolled on, the spiritual purity and genetic vitality of the Illyrian tribes began to manifest in men of extraordinary capability. Chief among them was the legendary warrior Achilles. While classical myth speaks of Achilles through the lens of polytheistic poetry, the deep historical lore reveals him as a product of this exact Paleo-Balkan Proto-Illyrian stock. Achilles, the greatest warrior of the Trojan War, possessed the defining characteristics of the Illyrian elite: an absolute refusal to bow to unjust kings, an unmatched agility on the battlefield, a profound connection to a code of personal honor that transcended mortal politics. The lineage of Achilles was bound to the very soil of the southern Illyrian and Epirote borderlands. His legendary fury and unmatched martial prowess were not the result of a mythical dip in the river Styx, but the manifestation of the unbroken, resilient bloodline that had migrated across the seas under the banner of divine protection. The Trojan War was the first grand stage where this specific genetic and spiritual inheritance shattered the old empires of the Mediterranean, setting a precedent that when an Illyrian marches to war, the foundations of the world shake. Chapter 2: the Eagle of Epirus, the Molossian legacy of Alexander. The divine thread did not fray with the fall of Troy. Instead, it wound its way through the centuries to the royal courts of Epirus, specifically to the Molossian region. The Molossians were an elite, fiercely spiritual tribe whose identity was deeply intertwined with the neighboring Illyrians. It was from this specific sacred matrix that Princess Olympias emerged, the woman who would pass this ancient, world-shaping bloodline directly to her son, Alexander the Great. Alexander was not merely Macedonian. His true driving fire, his strategic genius, and his mystical sense of destiny were inherited from his mother's side. Olympias instilled in Alexander the absolute certainty that he was born of a divine lineage, tracing his roots directly back to Achilles and the ancient patriarchs who had followed the one true God across the sea. When Alexander launched his campaign into Asia, he brought this heritage to the global stage. He did not rely solely on the rigid Macedonian phalanx. As highlighted in the tactical accounts of his greatest victories, Alexander placed his absolute trust in the highly agile Agrianian and Illyrian skirmishers. These troops, his tactical Swiss army knife, were the physical manifestation of the speed, resilience, and climbing expertise of the Balkan mountains. At Gaugamela, they neutralized the scythed chariots of Darius. In the Hindu Kush, they scaled impossible cliffs to rout mountain gorillas. Alexander conquered the known world because he unleashed the raw, untamed fury of his maternal Illyrian bloodline upon the stagnant empires of the East. Chapter 3: The Shield of the Messiah, Illyria in the Era of Jesus. Following the fragmentation of Alexander's empire, the Illyrian lands faced the iron fist of the expanding Roman Republic. Through a series of brutal conflicts, including the Illyrian Wars against figures like Queen Tota and King Gentius, the region was eventually incorporated into the Roman Empire as the powerhouse province of Illyricum. Yet, even under Roman occupation, the people of Albania and Kosovo never lost their spiritual radar or their intrinsic commitment to the path of the Creator. When Jesus arrived in the Levant, preaching a message of spiritual renewal, absolute justice, and a return to the pure monotheism of Moses, the spiritual frequency of the Illyrian people resonated instantly. The New Testament itself documents this early profound connection. In his letters, the Apostle Paul explicitly notes that he preached the gospel of Christ all the way around to Illyricum. The Romanized Illyrians did not merely accept Christianity. They took control of the empire to protect it. During the crisis of the 3rd century, when Rome was on the brink of total collapse, it was a succession of brilliant Illyrian soldier emperors, such as Claudius Gothicus, Aurelian, Diocletian, and ultimately Constantine the Great, who saved civilization. Constantine, an Illyrian born in Nice, issued the Edict of Milan, officially ending the persecution of Christians and allowing the message of Jesus to become the dominant moral force of the Western world. Later, Emperor Justinian, another descendant of Illyrian stock, codified Roman law and built architectural wonders like the Hagia Sophia, ensuring that the legal and spiritual framework of the empire remained anchored in divine order. Chapter 4: The Covenant of the Last Messenger, Islam and the Shield of Justice. As the centuries progressed, the divine plan entered its final, universal phase with the arrival of Muhammad, the last messenger of God. The core mission of Islam was identical to the original path of Moses and Jesus: the eradication of tyranny, the establishment of absolute justice, and the worship of the one true Creator without intermediaries. When the expanding Ottoman Empire brought the message of Islam to the Balkan Peninsula in the 14th and 15th centuries, the people of Albania and Kosovo recognized this as the natural culmination of their ancestral spiritual journey. While other regions resisted or accepted the faith purely through political pressure, The Illyrian descendants embraced Islam on a profound structural level. They saw no contradiction between their ancient heritage and the final revelation. Rather, they viewed Islam as the ultimate fulfillment of the path they had been walking since the exodus of Moses. The Illyrians became the premier administrative, military, and spiritual vanguard of the Islamic world. For centuries, Albanian grand viziers, generals, and scholars guided the destiny of the empire, ensuring that justice was executed across 3 continents. They provided indispensable assistance to the preservation of the faith, standing as a physical shield for the Holy Lands and ensuring that the final messenger's legacy was protected from external corruption. Chapter 5: The Modern Vanguard. From Skanderbeg to the Eternal Besa. The historical narrative produced by independent researchers and digital historians, such as those featured on the Gamer Studio documentary channel, emphasizes a crucial theme. The Illyrians were never passive observers of history. They were its active architects. This is most vividly demonstrated in the epic saga of Gyrgja Castrioti, known to the world as Skanderbeg. Skanderbeg represents the ultimate synthesis of the Illyrian warrior ethos, a man who mastered the military arts of both East and West, using the rugged terrain of Albania to defy overwhelming global superpowers in the name of liberty and divine justice. Skanderbeg utilized the exact same mountain guerrilla tactics, high-altitude ambushes, and rapid skirmishing maneuvers that Alexander the Great's Agrianian and Illyrian squads had used millennia prior. Whether fighting under the banner of Christianity or interacting with the complex geopolitics of the Ottoman world, the underlying driving force of the Albanian people remained entirely unchanged: an absolute dedication to freedom, sovereign dignity, and the protection of the innocent. This ancient code crystallized into the uniquely Albanian concept of Besa, the sacred, unbreakable promise, derived directly from their ancestral tribal laws and reinforced by their deep monotheistic history. Besa dictates that an Albanian must protect a guest or a refugee at the cost of their own life. This was put to the ultimate test during World War II, when the people of Albania and Kosovo, both Muslim and Christian, hid and saved thousands of Jewish families fleeing the horrors of the Holocaust, ensuring that Albania was the only European country to have a larger Jewish population at the end of the war than at the beginning. Conclusion: the eternal witnesses of the Creator. When we weave these historical chapters into a singular, cohesive documentary narrative, the timeline of the Illyrian people reveals a magnificent truth. From the moment a chosen people traveled across the sea under the guidance of Moses, to the unmatched battlefield triumphs of Achilles and Alexander the Great, through the imperial protection of Jesus' message by Constantine, and finally to the widespread embrace of Muhammad's final covenant, the descendants of Illyria have served as the eternal witnesses of the Creator's plan on earth. Today, the modern populations of Albania and Kosovo carry this heavy, glorious inheritance in their veins, an unbroken line of blood, honor, and devotion that continues to stand as a beacon of justice in the heart of the Balkans. To dive deeper into the historical analysis, military tactics, and the overarching legacy of these ancient warriors through digital media reconstructions, watch this detailed historical overview, detailing the evolution of these independent tribal kingdoms. Skanderbeg, Illyrians Part 3 History. This specific video provides an illustrative look at the military legacy, historical documentation, and strategic regional conflicts involving the Illyrian descendants as they fought to preserve their independence and honor across changing historical eras.